Colleagues, can I ask you to take the seats, please? We'll begin shortly. This works? Okay, let us begin then. So, the second meeting of the 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development is called to order. Your Excellency, Mr. Bob Ray, the President of the CSocD, Your Excellency, Mr. Philemon Young, President of the General Assembly, Mr. Guy Ryder, Undersecretary General for Policy, Mr. Li Jinhua, Undersecretary General for the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Ms. Jana Almoni, Chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to welcome you all to the 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development. Your presence reflects the continued relevance of this Commission and its importance of advancing social development for a fairer world for all. I will begin by reflecting briefly on this year's priority theme: strengthening solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion to accelerate the delivery of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and Programme of Action of the World Summit for the Social Development, as well as the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Society based on inclusion, social justice, and solidarity is better positioned to invest in policies that advance social progress. However, we are witnessing a concerning decline in trust that we must address. Low trust weakens social cohesion and drives greater divides, affecting economic growth and efforts to, for example, eradicate poverty and hunger. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, social cohesion is the glue that binds societies together. To strengthen social cohesion, governments need integrated policy strategies that address development gaps and promote transparent and accountable governance. Effective tax systems, adequate income security, affordable healthcare, quality education, and decent jobs are central to these strategies. A strengthened multilateralism is also essential to achieving social development goals. The upcoming Second World Summit for Social Development is 9 months presents an opportunity to generate consensus on the actions needed to achieve it. Ladies and gentlemen, this Commission is tasked with fostering an intensified global dialogue on social development. This year, we focus on the emerging issue of social resilience and social development. We will hold 5 panel discussions during this session. Later today, a high-level panel discussion will discuss the Second World Summit for Social Development. Tomorrow morning, the Ministerial Forum will take place, focusing on the ways to strengthening solidarity and social cohesion. On Wednesday, 12th February, 2 panels will explore social resilience and social development. We will focus on the first one, policies to bolster social resilience in the context of more frequent and complex crises, and second, the universal rights-based social protection systems that adapt the evolving risks and support social resilience. And in the interactive dialogue on the preparation for the Second World Summit for Social Development will take place in the morning on Thursday, 13th of February. And finally, to acknowledge the importance of the International Year of Cooperatives 2025 and the role of cooperatives in sustainable development, a multi-stakeholder forum will discuss ways to promote solidarity and social cohesion through cooperatives and the social and solidarity economy as a path for achieving SDGs on Thursday afternoon. Distinguished delegates, this session will also address the critical issues of aging, youth, and family. The Commission plays a central role in reviving the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action of Aging and in assessing progress towards mainstreaming aging at national, regional, and global levels. At the same time, engaging young people in our efforts to strengthening social cohesion and inclusivity is vital in shaping policies aligned with their perspectives. This is why we need their active participation in platforms like this Commission. The expected outcome of this Commission is actionable policy recommendations to support Member States and ECOSOC in implementing the outcomes of the 2023 SDG Summit and the 2024 Summit of the Future, thereby accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and preparing for the Second World Summit for Social Development. I look forward to the active engagement of all delegations, civil society organizations, and the UN representatives for a successful session. I thank you and I wish you, from beneath of my heart, all fruitful deliberation. Thank you so much. And now I invite His Excellency Robert Ray, the President of the Economic and Social Council. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Christophe, Excellencies, Mr. President, Mr. Undersecretary, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great honor for me as President of the Economic and Social Council to be able to welcome you all to the 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development. We all know that as we gather here, the world faces a great range of challenges that really are defining for us the current global economic and social landscape. But let me suggest to you that the values we bring to this conversation were perhaps best expressed in 1789 at the time of the great event known as the French Revolution, when the slogan was quite simple: liberty, freedom, equality, and fraternity, which I think in today's age we would say is better expressed by the word solidarity. And as our Secretary General has pointed out, in today's age, solidarity is actually necessity. It's a matter of requirement. We must move forward together, and we must move forward in a way that brings everyone forward. Global hunger has remained at roughly the same level for 3 consecutive years. And the persistently high number of people living in extreme poverty is now at levels that we saw before the pandemic. The impact of climate change is ongoing, and social inequalities continue to pose real threats to the world, particularly to those already in vulnerable situations. And the challenge that we face is that we risk undoing the progress that we have made. This year, the high-level political forum, which I will also have the opportunity to share, will focus on a very simple theme: reinforcing the 2030 Agenda and eradicating poverty in times of multiple crises, the effective delivery of sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions. And your discussions here will be an important step towards the high-level political forum taking place later. And it's important for us to recall how we came together in 1995 at the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and Program of Action of the World Summit for Social Development in shaping a fairer global society. If you consider what we said and did in Copenhagen in 1995, and then look at how far we've come, it's actually a truly remarkable story. We have made significant progress. But the events of the last several years have threatened that progress, and that's why we have to recommit to it and figure out how we go well beyond it. The expression of solidarity is that for many, many people, life has gotten better. And we need to understand this reality. In many parts of the world, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty and have been lifted out of conditions that had endured for hundreds, indeed thousands of years. That's a remarkable story. But it's also important for us to recognize those who have been left behind. And in particular, I want to talk not because of my own personal situation, but I want to talk about a couple of groups that are left behind. Those who are getting older, which of course is all of us, but some of us are obviously getting older, and those who are young. And whenever we look at the statistics for how are things going, for example, a very simple statistic, the unemployment statistic, when you look at that statistic, you've got to look at the statistic for how does it affect young people. What is the level of unemployment among young people? Because there, as people make their first entry into the labor market, have just completed whatever education they have, and are now entering into the workforce, can they get a job? Can they get their foot on the ladder? And if young people can't get their foot on the ladder, it creates a huge range of social problems. The aging issue is important because demographics is everything. And as we look at a population that's getting older, the question then becomes, well, are we in fact engaging that older population in how they can stay engaged and stay involved in the life of society? Because otherwise the cost to all of us will only grow. And that's why I personally believe that developing an international legal instrument on the rights of older people could strengthen our efforts to shift our perceptions about old people, ageism, and understand what more we can do to allow older people to become and remain active participants in the life of their societies. So we need to amplify the voices of old people, and we need to amplify the voices of young people. And we also have to accept the fact that on one of the other great frontiers where we have not made as much progress as we need to, we have to look at the situation of those people who are disabled. Because, again, when we look at the broad range of things that have improved for a great many people over a great many parts of society, we have to recognize that when it comes to people with disabilities, we have not made anywhere near the progress that we need to make. When we look at financial inclusion, when we look at health care, when we look at water, we look at disaster resilience, we have not given a sufficient priority to those who are least able to protect themselves in the face of all those things. We've made some progress. Education laws, early warning systems on disasters are getting better and getting more accessible. We're doing better with online services, but we still need to work harder to make sure that what we're doing aligns with a convention, a legal instrument that already exists, which is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And there the issue of inclusion becomes all important. And my last point is on gender equality. We must never lose sight of this. We cannot go backwards on the issue of equality rights for women. We will not achieve the goals we want to achieve right across the SDG spectrum. We will not achieve it unless we make progress on the equality of women. But we do have some things that have helped us. The Summit of the Future, which I know the Undersecretary is going to be talking about, where we did find a way to come to a document in the Pact of the Future that provides us with important momentum. And that momentum will take us into the Second World Summit for Social Development in Doha, where we will be building on what we've done, but we're also going to be making sure that voices are heard so that we're making improvements. It's not simply a matter of consolidating where we are. It's a matter of having a vision for what are the necessary next steps that we need to take. So I would suggest to you that the political declaration that comes out of Doha should be concise as much as possible, action-oriented, and really fit for the purpose that we need to address the issues that are around us. I'm glad that my friend also my Bureau colleague, the Vice President Christophe, that he referred to the issue of trust. How does mistrust happen? We all know how it happens. Mistrust happens when we don't do what we say we're going to do. It's quite simple. In any relationship, where does trust break down? Trust breaks down when somebody does something that they promised us they would never do, or when they promise to do something and it simply doesn't happen. So it's often because expectations are created of an exaggerated kind. I promise you we'll do this. I promise you we'll do that, usually before an election. And then it doesn't get done. And then the opposite happens. And that's what creates the mistrust. So maybe we should learn a simple lesson. Promise less and do more. Our execution, our ability to execute, has to grow. Last week, we had a good meeting of the ECOSOC coordination segment and the partnership segment, which was a very good exchange that we had last week. And there we all agreed that we needed to break down the silos between us. We needed to break down the gaps between us. And so I think we have to continue to draw inspiration from some of those necessary conversations. And we need to really get at this question of how do we increase trust, how do we increase solidarity, and how do we increase inclusion? And these are the tests that we all have, and these are the tests that we all share. Je vous souhaite la bonne chance et l'opportunité.
I wish you good luck and the opportunity to improve the life that we all share. And this word share is so important. It's important to know that we're not alone in the world. I'm not talking solely about individual rights, but the rights of communities. We're talking about social rights. That is what's important. And we must highlight the importance of doing what we've promised that we would do. That is what will ensure that there is shared trust in the future. Thank you very much, and I wish you every success in your discussions. Thank you.
I thank the President of the ECOSOC, Ambassador Ray. Thank you very much for also underlining the word solidarity, which for me, coming from Poland, is especially therefore.
Solidarność.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now, j'invite le Président de...
I now ask the President of the General Assembly to deliver his statement. Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Chair of the 63rd Commission for Social Development, Ambassador Christophe Maria CSocD63, for the kind invitation to join you today. Today we unite around the common cause of strengthening the solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion in delivering on the 1995 Copenhagen commitments. Commitments that place people at the heart of development and direct our economies to meet the human needs of everyone, everywhere. As we commence the 63rd session, the need for progress is tangible. With a mere 5 years left to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we must inject momentum into our social justice and equity aims. In a world of divisions, we must be clear about the challenges we face. The impact of geopolitical tensions and climate change, rising health inequities, and the unresolved debt issues continues to ripple across global economies, tearing at the fabric of our communities and societies. Over the last decade, the income gap between the haves and the have-nots has grown, rising above 20%. According to the World Bank, almost 700 million people live in extreme poverty at this moment. Millions of them are still struggling to return to the living standards they had known before the COVID-19 pandemic. All this while, the latest figures indicate that about 4.5 billion people, more than half of the world's population, are not covered by essential health services. In 2023, 20% of young people were registered as not in employment, education, or training. 2 in 3 of them are women. We must reverse these trends. By taking a values-based approach to economic development, one that prioritizes people and planet over power and profit, we can indeed quicken our pace to achieve this turnaround. The social and solidarity economy, which the General Assembly endorsed in December, encompasses these aims and offers a key pathway to sustainable and inclusive growth, one that empowers local communities, supports decent work, promotes gender equality, and prioritizes equitable provision of health care and education, and ensures social protection systems. When every $1 invested in social protection yields $3 of return, measured in improved health and productivity, we literally have everything to gain. It offers our best shot to ensure we leave no one behind. Excellencies, in the words of Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest." The Second World Summit for Social Development in November will be a key moment to demonstrate what we have learned, assess the gaps, promote human dignity, and offer bold solutions that ensure socially equitable outcomes for future generations. I thank the permanent representatives of Belgium and Morocco for their able leadership as co-facilitators of the intergovernmental negotiation of the political declaration, the outcome of the summit. The Commission's 63rd session marks a significant juncture in these preparations, and I encourage delegations in their deliberations to extend the outlook towards this summit by agreeing to the progress we need. Together, let us embrace solidarity. Let us pursue innovative economic models and do our utmost today to ensure more just and equitable societies for all. For until then, none of us can truly rest. I thank you.
I thank the President of General Assembly, Mr. Philemon Young, for his statement. And now I invite Mr. Guy Ryder, the Undersecretary of General for Policy in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, to deliver his speech.
Thank you, Chair. Ambassador Ray, President of CSoC, Excellency Mr. Philemon Young, President of the General Assembly, my colleague Under Secretary General Lee Jean-Hua, Ms. Liana Almany, Chair of the NGO Committee on Social Development, distinguished delegates. It's truly a pleasure to join today's opening session of this 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development. And let me congratulate you, Chair, and all members of the Bureau for the excellent preparations for this important session. It is a session which takes place at a pivotal moment in the human story. New and intensifying trends are impacting our development efforts. Conflicts, climate change, and high and rising inequalities all continue to pose a significant threat to our collective goal of shared prosperity on a peaceful and healthy planet. Digital transformations continue to gather pace, but with uncertain impacts. And people are feeling increasingly anxious, divided, and uncertain about their future. And as we have heard, their trust in government and in all public institutions is declining. And this uncertainty has become, in itself, an obstacle to collective action at national and international level. The outlook for people-centered progress and for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals is frankly bleak from where we stand today. But it is not too late to change course, and we can afford neither complacency nor resignation. The work of this Commission can help us craft the solutions needed to address these adverse circumstances and these critical issues. And this year's focus on strengthening solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion is timely and needed. Delegates, last year, Member States pledged a new beginning for multilateralism at the Summit of the Future, with sustainable development in all of its three dimensions as a central objective. They reaffirmed poverty as our most significant global challenge and set out a clear vision of multilateral institutions that can deliver on promises with strengthened international cooperation. They committed to investing in people to end poverty, to address inequalities, to improve people's lives and livelihoods, to strengthen trust and social cohesion, and to build peaceful, just, inclusive, and resilient societies. And the work of this Commission provides an opportunity for us to leverage, to live up to these commitments, and to inject them, move them forward into the outcomes of upcoming high-level processes, notably the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, and then the 2nd World Summit for Social Development. And the message, as we've heard, is a clear one. No one can be left behind. We must work towards ensuring the well-being of all peoples everywhere. By managing demographic transitions and by making digital transformations work for people, by redoubling our effort to transition to renewable energy and towards green and caring economies that create decent jobs and opportunities for women and young people, through people-centered fiscal policies, better integrated and more participatory decision-making, and other concrete steps towards inclusive, just and socially cohesive societies based on full respect of human rights and on equality. So, colleagues, 2025 is a crucial year. The 2nd World Summit for Social Development must lay the foundation fulfilling the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration and accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Because with only 5 years remaining until our SDG deadline, we simply must secure progress in the social dimension of sustainable development. Open and broad consultations in preparation for the summit will be an opportunity to build trust, to reinforce the connections among people, between people and their governments, and between people and global institutions. And for that, we must listen more attentively to people's voices and ensure that they can shape their own futures. I wish you, Mr. Chair, and all delegates success in your important efforts this week. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. USG for Policy. And now the next, I invite Mr. Li Jinghua, the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs in the Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Take the floor.
Thank you. His Excellency Mr. Christoph CSocD63, Chair of the 63rd Commission session, His Excellency Mr. Bob Rell, President of the Economic and Social Council, His Excellency Philemon Yang, President of the General Assembly, Mr. Guy Ryder, and the Secretary General for Policy, Ms. Liana Amani, Chair of the NGO Committee for the Social Development, distinguished delegates. Let me start by congratulating you, Mr. Chair, and the Bureau of the 63rd session of the Commission for the Social Development for your diligent work on this ambitious agenda before us. As your Secretariat, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs will continue supporting your work towards a successful outcome. Distinguished delegates, in 1995, the Copenhagen Declaration on the Social Development and its program of action established a path-breaking consensus for the people-centered development. This vision was reaffirmed by 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, committed to leave no one behind. While the progress in social development goals has been remarkable over the past 3 decades, it has been fragile and uneven, facing increasing risks, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. Geopolitical, environmental, and socio-economic crises, compounded by the mega trends like digital transformation and aging populations, threatened hard-won development gain, jeopardizing solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion. 692 million people are still living in extreme poverty, and 633 million people are facing hunger. Inequalities are on the rise, decent work is scarce, and the healthcare, social protection, and quality education remain as a luxury for a few rather than a right for all. Modest economic growth in many countries has hindered social progress. Due to the unprecedented shocks and prolonged monetary tightening, projected global GDP growth of 2.8% in this year remains below the pre-pandemic average. Many developing countries face high debt, limited physical space, and slow productivity growth, hampering their ability to invest in human capital, infrastructure, and essential services. While the green transition and the digital technology offered growth opportunities, these made disproportionately benefit developed economies, leaving many developing countries behind. We must step up our efforts and confront these challenges and development gaps with determination and collective resolve. This means a deepening of the trust, both among the people and in the public systems. It also means increasing investments in decent work, social protection, and quality health and education, underpinned by effective and fair tax policies. Distinguished delegates, societies built on inclusion, social justice, and solidarity can more easily scale up the investments in policies advancing social progress. Meaningful consultation with stakeholders, especially marginalized populations, on policy design, implementation, and follow-up is crucial. This November, world leaders were convened in Doha for Second World Summit for Social Development. This summit must deliver not just a declaration, but a concrete action plan with clear timelines, responsibilities, and monitoring mechanisms. Your discussions here are crucial for shaping that plan. Building on Copenhagen commitments and consensus, you will provide guidance on the social perspective for accelerating implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Together, let us forge a path towards the people-centered, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
I thank the USG for Economic Social Affairs, and now I give the floor to Ms. Liana Almoni, the chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development. The floor is yours, Liana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ambassador CSocD63. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, thank you for inviting the NGO Committee for Social Development to be part of the opening for the Commission to present the 2025 Civil Society Declaration. The Civil Society Declaration is prepared each year by the NGO Committee for Social Development on the priority theme and as part of a consolidation of the work of our membership, grassroots representatives, and those with lived experience, and other civil society actors and partners. This year, we are pleased to share that the declaration has been signed by almost 1,000 organizations and individuals. We approach this moment in the history of the United Nations with a sense of urgency. The NGO Committee for Social Development was created nearly 30 years ago in the excitement following the first World Summit for Social Development and the adoption of the Copenhagen Declaration and Platform of Action. Since that time, we, as civil society and a global community, have continued this work through the Millennium Development Goals, followed by the Sustainable Development Goals, the Summit of the Future 2024, and moving toward the Second World Summit for Social Development coming up in November 2025. Yet the promises of ending poverty, achieving full employment, and strengthening social inclusion remain aspirational. People's needs are changing in response to a quickly evolving context. People want more responsive action to address key challenges. It is imperative to rethink our whole approach to society, to accept and implement social change and transformative justice. A disconnected and fragmented approach has not produced the desired results. Social inclusion, cohesion, solidarity, and resilience are the essential pillars for prosperity and security, as it was stated in the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development, and still are the crucial pathways for accelerating progress, establishing effective multilateralism, and implementing the interconnected and holistic actions necessary for a sustainable future. Towards achieving this goal, we, the NGO Committee for Social Development, as a mandated body for civil society engagement on social development initiatives at the UN, advocate for the following. In the current state of our world, vulnerable and marginalized individuals face social injustice, discrimination, and exclusion in many, if not all, aspects of their everyday lives. We must modify certain sociocultural patterns and norms with a view to eliminating stigma, prejudices, and stereotypes of all kinds and in all areas. Transformation begins within ourselves by nurturing and protecting the relationships we want to see in society, but it also requires bold action to redress historic harms and promote social development for all. Transformative social policies and programs that promote social inclusion must provide opportunities for decent work and employment, for access to digital technology, and access to public services, especially education, housing, healthcare, and social protections, including universal basic income, all within a human rights framework. All individuals must be equal before the law and entitled to equal protection of the law without any discrimination. Legal recognition and identity plays a critical role to ensure the global community upholds its promise of leaving no one behind, as set forth in the 2030 Agenda, and should be inclusive of all people from birth to death. We must promote meaningful participation of vulnerable and marginalized communities and individuals in order to develop effective and efficient policies and projects that overcome social exclusion. Solidarity is based on the core principle of collective action and is founded on shared values and beliefs among people and countries and across borders and other socially constructed barriers. Solidarity calls for moving beyond our limited personal or national interest and embracing our common responsibility for the common good. Solidarity demands a system that upholds intergenerational justice and ensures a just, dignified, and sustainable way of living. Structural change, including accountability and transparency, must be taken seriously and consistently by all stakeholders. Civil society and grassroots organizations, especially those led by young people, women and girls, indigenous communities, and other marginalized groups, need to be at the forefront to contribute to the social, political, economic, environmental, and cultural development of society. We must strongly promote inclusive, accountable, and transparent decisions by all, for all, in order to make good on our shared vision of a sustainable and resilient future. And on the emerging issue of social resilience identified during this commission. The rapid spread and frequency, along with the complexity and interconnectedness of crises ranging from the environmental, social, economic, and political sphere, underscore the urgent need to foster social resilience, particularly among vulnerable and marginalized populations. Social resilience is defined as the ability of individuals and communities to adapt, recover, and thrive in the face of serious disruptions. Resilience is best nurtured through a human-centered, preventative lens that proactively builds adaptive capacities. And here we can learn from the wisdom and ancestral knowledge of Indigenous communities. Resilience is not static. It involves ongoing community building, coping, learning, transforming, and adapting to new challenges through pathways that allow for long-term sustainability. There is an urgent need to create forward-looking and flexible social protection systems and floors that leverage available data. Investing in Social Security empowers people to adjust to changes in the economy and the labor market, to shocks and crises, thereby supporting a transition to a more sustainable economy. Collaboration across governments and between sectors can facilitate the sharing of information, resources, and best practices, as well as the establishment of capacity building aimed to enhance collective resilience that will proactively address future challenges. Furthermore, social coherence and resilience must be underpinned by a more just, effective, and equitable financial architecture. Promoting debt relief to countries that are in debt distress, as well as inclusive and effective tax cooperation, are essential when building social resilience. As members of civil society, we know firsthand from the grassroots that fostering a community's social resilience is at the core of strengthening social inclusion, ensuring dignity for all, and building societies that are truly cohesive. From community-led responses in the aftermath of climate shocks to state-led efforts to increase access to resources and social protection, building social resilience is an ongoing process and lived reality that is essential to the well-being of millions of people around the world, navigating inequality, displacement, and structural barriers every day. It is with the above consideration in mind that we, the NGO Committee for Social Development, call upon member states to ensure equal access to a healthy and safe environment, to affordable and adequate housing, low-cost nutritional food, quality health care, basic income, public infrastructure and services, including access to water, sanitation, family care support, energy, financial services, and digital technology. To establish nationally owned, human rights-based, and well-financed social protection systems and floors that will sustain populations affected by climate change, pandemics, and economic and labor market disruptions. To extend debt relief and forgiveness for the least developed countries based on values of solidarity and justice, while establishing an effective United Nations sovereign debt workout mechanism to support this process. Recognize care as a foundational societal responsibility by adapting strategies to respond to the growing need for childcare and care for older persons and people with disabilities, addressing unpaid care work and supporting those who provide it. And promote meaningful participation of marginalized people, including but not limited to women and girls, children, youth, older persons, Indigenous people, people experiencing homelessness, migrants, persons with disabilities, people displaced by natural disasters, and people that are economically disadvantaged. They need to be incorporated into the design, implementation, and assessment of policy responses for effective and impactful outcomes. 30 years after the first World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen, its objectives remain just as relevant as ever. Yet the global context has changed significantly since 1995, and we need to consider how the challenges and opportunities we face as an international community have evolved as we work towards the actualization of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration and the goals of the 2030 Agenda. We must envision a new kind of society in which the future generations will live and commit to systemic and structural change to protect human rights and prioritize the welfare of people and the planet. Key participatory processes must be established, and we must rebalance relations between the state, society, markets, and nature. Empowering those who typically get left behind has to be more than just words, and only by doing so can we develop and implement effective and sustainable policy frameworks and create lasting social justice. In this regard, civil society stands ready to complement and help shape state efforts at every turn, uplifting grassroots perspectives and empowering people to participate in the design of policies meant to support them. Thank you for your attention and dedication to the pursuit of a better future for all. Together, through meaningful collaboration, we can forge a path towards a more inclusive, transparent, resilient, and just system at every level. Thank you.
I thank the chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development and welcome all our partners sitting from the NGO community. Welcome. Good to see you in the room. So finally, we will now hear the statement by a youth representative, Ms. Judy Kipkenda, the co-chair of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, who actually cannot be, unfortunately, with us in person in the room. So she will deliver her statement via pre-recorded video message. So please focus on the screens now.
Good morning, esteemed members of the Commission for Social Development. My name is Judy Kipkenda. I come from the Indigenous Ogiek people of Kenya. I'm also the UN Global Indigenous Youth Caucus co-chair, and today I'll be speaking on behalf of the Global Youth constituents. Today, we urge the Commission to prioritize strengthening solidarity, social inclusion, social cohesion, to accelerate the delivery of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration and Programme of Action, the World Summit for Social Development, and implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Our call to action. The global inequalities are widening. The youth face unprecedented challenges, including unemployment, underemployment, poverty, inequalities, climate change, and conflicts. These issues disproportionately impact marginalized youths, including those from indigenous communities, people with disabilities, and youth living in poverty. Social cohesion is eroding. Polarization, discrimination, and social exclusion are on the rise globally. These trends undermine the social fabrics, fuel conflicts, and hinder progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The youths are key to the solutions. Youths possess the creativity, innovation, and energy to address these challenges. However, our voices and contributions are often marginalized, ignored in decision-making processes. Our recommendations: invest in youth-led solutions. Empower youth-led organizations by providing funding, technical support, and platforms for youth-led initiatives that actually address the social and economic challenges. Integrate youth perspectives, listen to our voice, ensure meaningful youth participation in all stages of policy development, implementation, and monitoring. Promote inclusive, equitable development, address systemic inequalities, combat discrimination based on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and socioeconomic status. We also urge you to invest in quality education and skills development to ensure access to affordable, inclusive, and quality education and training that equips young people with skills and knowledge needed for the 21st century job markets. And also create decent work opportunities through promoting policies that create decent jobs for youths, including entrepreneurship and the green economy. We urge you to strengthen social cohesion and resilience. Promote intercultural dialogue and understanding. These will foster spaces for dialogue and exchanges between diverse communities and build bridges of understanding and respect. Invest in community-based initiatives, support community-led programs that promote social inclusion, such as youth centers, sports programs, and cultural events. Address the root causes of conflicts, invest in conflict prevention and resolution mechanism, including peace education and youth-led initiatives. In conclusion, we urge the Commission to take the bold step and make decisive action to strengthen solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion by investing in youths, promoting equity, and fostering social harmony. Through this, we can create a more just and equitable and sustainable future for all. Thank you so much for giving us, the youth, the space to present our issues, and I wish you a successful 63rd session. Thank you so much.
Yes, let us thank the youth representative. And that concludes the opening segment. It's kind of the celebrations of the 63rd session. Now we go back to the ordinary work. But before that, let me thank our distinguished guests for joining us today. Now I briefly pause the meeting to allow our speakers to take their leave and the podium to be rearranged for the next part of our program of this work. So please remain seated. It's just a brief moment. Okay, colleagues, let us resume. Please take your seats. Okay, colleagues, let us start, please. If you have an urgent conversation, please conclude them outside the room. I won't start naming the countries, but please take your seat. Colleagues, we have to start, please. Okay, so now I invite the Commission to resume the consideration of the item 1 of its provisional agenda titled Election of the Officers in order to elect the remaining members of the Bureau. Members of Commission will recall that, I hope you still recall that during the first meeting of the present session, which was held on 14th of February 2024, a year ago, the Commission elected myself as the chair of the 63rd session of the Commission by acclamation. And also elected by acclamation Ms. Julia Eberl of Austria, Ms. Paula Andrea Morris Garrido of Guatemala as vice chairs of the Commission for the session. The members of the Commission will further recall that during the same meeting, the elections of the remaining members of the Bureau from the group of African states and the group of the Asia-Pacific states were postponed on the understanding that upon the nomination by the regional groups, the nominated members would be able to participate fully in the Bureau meetings in preparation for the Commission's 63rd session. I'm pleased to inform that the Commission that the group of African states has endorsed the candidature of Ms. Jocelyn Kwishaka, second Counselor of the Permanent Mission of Burundi, and the group of Asia-Pacific states has endorsed the candidature of Ms. Almaha Mubarak Al-Thani, the second Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Qatar, as vice chairs of the 63rd session. Concerning the election of Ms. Julia Eberl of Austria, since Ms. Eberl subsequently completed her tour of duty in New York, the group of the Western European and other states has nominated Mr. Olivier Grünenbacher, first Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Austria, to fill the remaining term of office as vice chair of the 63rd session of the Commission. In absence of the other nominations, may I take that the Commission wishes to elect, by acclamation, Ms. Jocelyn Kwishaka of Burundi, Ms. Almaha Mubarak Al-Thani of Qatar, and Mr. Olivier Grünenbacher of Austria as vice chairs of the 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development. I hear no objections, so it's decided. Congratulations, colleagues. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to congratulate Ms. Kwishaka, Ms. Al-Thani, and Mr. Grünenbacher on their election formally now. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank the fellow Bureau members for their hard work and support in preparing of the session. We were working really hard to get it done. Right. So I wish now to inform the Commission that following the consultation within the Bureau, it has been agreed that our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Paola Andrea Morris Garrido of Guatemala, will also assume the responsibilities of the rapporteur for this session. So I congratulate Ms. Morris Garrido on this appointment. I know it's additional hard work to be done for our common good. Thank you so much. Okay, so now now I invite the Commission to begin its consideration of the agenda item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. The provisional agenda for this session is contained in the document E/CN.5/2025/1, and the proposed organization of work is before you in the annex to the same document. So now I invite the Commission to first consider the provisional agenda for this session as contained in the document E/CN.5/2025/1. The provisional agenda and the documentation for the 61st session were approved by the Economic and Social Council in its decision 2024/316. May I take it that the Commission wishes to adopt the provisional agenda as contained in document E/CN.5/2025/1. I see no objection, so it's decided. I now invite the Commission to turn to the proposed organization of work as contained in the annex to the document E/CN.5/2025/1. First, I will make a few general comments about the conduct of our work. I would like to seek your cooperation in starting all meetings on time, which is 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. sharp, to make optimum use of the conference resources allocated to the Commission. I would also like to record that the time limits for statements in the general discussion. Statements on behalf of the groups shall not exceed 7 minutes. Statements by individual delegations shall not exceed 5 minutes. And statements by intergovernmental organizations and entities to the United Nations system, as well as by the non-governmental organizations in consultative status with the Economic and Social Council, shall not exceed 3 minutes. As announced during the informal briefing on the 9th of January this year, the time limits will be strictly enforced and the microphones will be muted when the speaking times have elapsed. I take this opportunity to remind delegations that the deadline in inscribing it in the list of speakers for general discussion is tomorrow, Tuesday, 11th of February at 6 p.m. Turning to the interactive dialogues, I urge all delegations to take brief interventions to put their questions to the panelists in a succinct and direct manner at the start of their intervention. As in the past, there will be no pre-established list of speakers for the panel discussions. Delegations will be asked to press the microphone button to request the floor. Every effort will be made to accommodate ministers and vice ministers first, and the delegations are encouraged to inform the Secretariat in the room on the day of the meeting if any ministers and vice ministers are interested to intervene in the respective panel discussions. The time limits for statements during the interactive dialogues will be up to the 3 minutes or less, depending on the number of those who wanted to take the floor, and microphone muting will be implemented on an if necessary basis. Delegates are reminded of the importance of adhering to the agreed time limits for the Commission to complete its work. A digital timekeeping device will be used during the statements of the general discussions and interactive dialogues to help keep the program on track. And I thank you in advance for your cooperation with the timekeeping device. May I take that the Commission wishes to approve the proposed modalities and the organization of work contained in the E/CN.5/2025/1 on the understanding that further adjustments will be made if necessary during the session? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Great. So now I invite the Commission to begin its consideration of the agenda item 3, entitled Follow-up to the World Summit for Social Development and the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly. And its sub-items: A, priority theme, strengthening solidarity, social inclusion and social cohesion to accelerate delivery of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration on the Social Development and Programme of Action of the World Summit for Social Development, as well as the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and B, review of the relevant United Nations plans and programs of actions pertaining to the situation of social groups, and C, emerging issues, social resilience, and social development. The documentation under this agenda item is listed in today's Journal of the United Nations. So now I give the floor to Mr. Charles Katoanga, Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, to introduce the documents under the agenda item 3 and its sub-items. Mr. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to appear before the Commission for the first time in my capacity as the Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. It is my further honor to introduce 5 reports of the Secretary General and the note by the Secretariat to the 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development. First, I would like to draw your attention to Agenda Item 3, Sub-Item A, Priority Theme, Strengthening Solidarity, Social Inclusion and Social Cohesion to accelerate the delivery of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and Program of Action of the World Summit for Social Development, as well as the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The report of the Secretary General on strengthening social cohesion through social inclusion, contained in document E/CN5/2025/3, is submitted for this item. In this report, the Secretary General makes the case for strengthening social cohesion through social inclusion to accelerate the delivery of the commitments through social cohesion to accelerate the delivery of the commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and Program of Action, as well as the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The report highlights the centrality of scaling up investments in social policies to promote social inclusion and rebuild trust to safeguard progress in the long run. The report stresses the importance of the Second World Summit on Social Development later in November to renew the global commitments to end poverty, reduce inequality, and leave no one behind by accelerating action towards supporting the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The report recommends that governments make concrete commitments to promote inclusive, just, and cohesive societies based on social justice, human rights, and equality, including by stepping up investments in decent work, social protection, health and education, underpinned by effective and fair tax policies. The report further highlights the importance of deepening trust between people and public institutions by enhancing the delivery and quality of services through transparent and accountable governance, broad participation, and strengthened multilateralism. Mr. Chair, I will now introduce the report of the Secretary General on social dimensions of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, contained in document E/CN5/2025/2. This report reviews the progress and challenges in social development experienced by African countries in the context of the impacts of multiple global crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the conflict in Ukraine, other escalating conflicts and climate shocks, and the growing debt distress, which continue to challenge governments' goals and aspirations to achieving Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda. As 2024 was a year of education for the African Union, the report takes stock of progress in education and some impactful measures taken by countries to ensure quality education in Africa. The report also provides an account of efforts undertaken by African countries, the UN system, and the AU to advance the implementation of the two agendas. The report's recommendations aim to further promote social development in Africa and advance key catalytic transitions and transformations needed to accelerate progress in the region towards sustainable development, including in food systems, education, energy, digital connectivity, jobs, social protection, and the restoration of the natural environment. Mr. Chair, I now turn to Agenda Item 3B, entitled Review of Relevant United Nations Plans and Programs of Action Pertaining to the Situation of Social Groups. The report of the Secretary General on policies and programs involving youth, contained in document E/CN5/2025/4, underscores the pivotal role of young people in achieving sustainable development and the 2030 Agenda. It highlights the transformative power of local youth actions in driving progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals by fostering trust, dialogue, and collaboration between youth and public authorities. Stronger, more inclusive pathways to development can be created. The report focuses on 3 critical areas for youth development: investing in youth through enhanced social protection, building resilient livelihoods by promoting quality education and decent work, and empowering youth to lead efforts in sustainable communities and climate action. The report emphasizes the importance of aligning local and national efforts, as well as involving youth in processes like the voluntary national reviews and voluntary local reviews. While accelerating the impact of youth-led initiatives and global partnerships, the report stresses the urgency of rebuilding trust and fostering intergenerational dialogue. Mr. Chair, I would now like to introduce the report of the Secretary General on preliminary assessments of the 4th review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging 2002, contained in document E/CN5/2025/5, submitted pursuant to Economic and Social Council Resolution 2023/15. The report provides an overview of the modalities for the review and appraisal, updates on the follow-up to the outcomes of the 4th review and appraisal process, and includes a proposed timeline for the 5th review and appraisal cycle, along with recommendations for consideration by the Commission. The report emphasizes the importance of a bottom-up participatory process that would allow member states to conduct thorough assessments of the progress in achieving the objectives of the Madrid Plan of Action at local, national, and regional levels. Next, I would like to draw the Commission's attention to the report of the Secretary General on implementation of the objectives of the International Year of the Family and its follow-up processes, contained in document A/80/61-E/2025/11. This report focuses on the impact of climate change on families relating to food and water scarcity, worsening physical and mental health, increased intrafamilial violence, and child marriage. It emphasizes the role of families in climate change and climate action as food producers, educators, consumers, and advocates. The report also highlights good practices in family policy making at national and regional levels and describes the activities in preparation for and observance of the IYF +30 at all levels. The report recommends strengthening the resilience of families against shocks by investing in education on climate change and early warning systems, enacting policies that enable families to make environmentally friendly consumer choices, and supporting evidence-based research on the impact of megatrends and complex crises on families as part of the follow-up to IYF +30 and beyond. Mr. Chairman, lastly, under item 3C, agenda item 3C, entitled Emerging Issues, the Commission is considering the theme Social Resilience and Social Development. A note by the Secretariat contained in document E/CN5/2025/7 has been prepared to facilitate consideration of this item through 2 panel discussions which are scheduled for Wednesday morning. Nearly 3 decades since the 1995 World Summit for Social Development, the global context for social development has shifted significantly. More frequent and complex crises originating in economic, health, or environmental spheres and rapid structural transformation, spurred digital transformation, and aging populations are increasing risks and vulnerabilities for people and societies and eroding social resilience. Member states and the United Nations system must confront these emerging challenges with determination and resolve. There are several avenues for action to build social resilience, including by prioritizing investments in people, implementing effective social policies such as universal and comprehensive social protection systems, effective governance, smart foresight, surveillance and preparedness, and adequate and sustainable financing. The second World Summit for Social Development in November will be a unique opportunity for the international community to advance action in these areas and ensure that its guiding principles are fit for purpose in the 21st century. Mr. Chair and distinguished delegates, this concludes my introduction of the reports and the note prepared for this commission. I trust that you will find the main messages and recommendations of these reports helpful to your deliberations, and I wish you every success for the session. Thank you.
I thank the Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development for his first appearance at the front of our Commission. And so now I invite the Commission to begin its general discussion of sub-items A and B of the agenda item 3. Before giving the floor to the first speaker, I would like to remind delegations to kindly respect the agreed time limits of 7 minutes for the delegation speaking on behalf of the groups, 5 minutes for the member states speaking in the national capacity. And the digital speech timer is visible on the screen to assist the speakers in managing their time, at the end of which an automatic muting of the microphone will be implemented. So I thank delegations for their understanding. And now I give the floor to the representative of Iraq on behalf of the Group 77 and China.
Mr. Chair, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of G77 and China. At the outset, the group congratulates you and the member of the Bureau on your election. We welcome the convening of 63rd session of the Commission for Social Development under the priority theme. The group of G77 and China thanks the Secretary General for his reports and takes note of the recommendations contained therein. Member states of G77 and China have made progress to promote social and economic inclusion, the provision of social protection and inclusive learning, placing the social inclusion of young people, elderly persons, and persons with disabilities at the center of their actions. However, challenges such as poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme and multidimensional poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, coupled with persistent socio-economic consequences, financial crisis, armed conflicts and wars, growing global food insecurity, biodiversity loss, and other challenges affect the economic and social progress of developing countries. We hope that the deliberations of the Commission at this session will enhance the response of the international community to these challenges. Mr. Chair, at the World Summit for Social Development held in Copenhagen in 1995, an international consensus to put people at the center of development was established. This vision remains relevant to the present day and is at the core of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its pledge to leave no one behind. Although progress has been achieved in key social development goals, it has stalled in many areas due to multiple and aggravating crises. Amongst other factors, the pandemics, escalating conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and climate change are negatively impacting progress towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. The second World Summit on Social Development to be held in Doha in November, it's a timely opportunity to advance a global consensus to step up investment in human capability and access to fundamental services and opportunities to end poverty everywhere, reduce inequality, and leave no one behind. By forging concrete commitments to promote inclusive, just, and socially cohesive society based on equity and equality, supported by solidarity and trust, the summit would lay a solid foundation for accelerating social progress to achieve the objectives of Copenhagen Declaration and the Sustainable Development Goals. Strengthening multilateralism is crucial for supporting member states in their policies for social inclusion, multilateral cooperation is essential to support global commons and global public goods, such as public health, a socially sustainable global economy, and an equitable and healthy planet. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will require a renewed commitment towards solidarity and trust to manage global challenges in accordance with the principles of equity and social justice. Lack of access, affordability, and skills are the main determinants for digital poverty. We emphasize the urgent need for international cooperation and increased investment to bridge the digital divides, particularly for people living in poverty and disadvantaged communities. Ensuring affordable and meaningful digital connectivity along with access to digital skills training will be crucial for inclusive development. Actions are needed at the national, regional, and international levels to bridge digital divides and to fully connect people living in poverty. The compounding impact of poverty, food insecurity, climate change, and environmental degradation call for a sustainable livelihood approach. This can be best realized by reaffirming the commitment to achieving sustainable development in its three dimensions in a balanced and integrated manner through, inter alia, the creation of employment opportunities for all and strengthened climate adaptation and mitigation. Finally, unprecedented times call for an unprecedented response from the international community based on the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and global solidarity. There is an imperative need for North-South, South-South, and Triangle cooperation to support national efforts to eradicate poverty and hunger and to realize the commitments made in Copenhagen Declaration as well as those contained in the 2030 Agenda to save the present and succeeding generations from the scourge of poverty and hunger. The international community should build a global architecture based on the developmental needs for people, a global system in which no one is left behind. I thank you.
Je remercie le distingué représentant.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Iraq and now give the floor to the representative of Poland, who will be speaking on behalf of the European Union. You have the floor, Poland.
Merci, Madam Chair. I have an honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova and Georgia, as well as Armenia, aligned themselves with this statement. First, I would like to thank all the Bureau members and you and DESA for their hard work preparing this session. The world requires solidarity and multilateral cooperation to foster peace, to give momentum towards the implementation of the SDGs in all their dimensions and to recommit to Copenhagen Declaration, address the gaps in its implementation, as well as identify answers to new challenges that have emerged since the Copenhagen Summit. In this context, we would like to recall the recently adopted Pact for the Future that represents a critical milestone and a way forward for a strengthened and reinvigorated multilateral system that can deliver its promises, leaving no one behind. The upcoming World Social Summit offers opportunity for the world to renew the social contract through a comprehensive human-centered approach based on the human rights, social cohesion, solidarity, and decent work, and thereby progress on SDGs. It should be anchored in the human rights and fundamental freedoms, including ILO's fundamental principles and rights at work. It's also crucial to ensure a fair and just transition to sustainable green and digital economy that promotes social inclusion and social justice and provides fair opportunities for all persons, starting from those most vulnerable. Reducing inequalities is a prerequisite to strengthen social cohesion. Social and solidarity economies can serve an important vehicle to tackle the twin transitions and enable sustainable growth. It is important also to recognize the mutually reinforcing nature of economy and social policies. The benefits and opportunities of artificial intelligence in the world of work can only be maximized and fairly distributed across the entire population if human rights and social inclusion are at the forefront. This can only be ensured through effective and social dialogue and collective bargaining. 2024 and for the first time in the recorded history, the global average temperature officially exceeded the ones of pre-industrial levels by 1.5 degrees centigrade, and the globe has continued to face a series of climate-related disasters. It is crucial to effectively follow up on the Paris Pact for People and the Planet, 4P. In line with the principles of the European Green Deal and the European Pillar for Social Rights, the European Union is committed to fair transition toward a climate-neutral and environmentally sustainable economy by 2050 that leaves no one behind. The EU is committed to fairness and solidarity between generations and calls for the implementation of the Declaration of Future Generations. As regards to external dimensions of social protection, the EU aims to support long-term sustainable, adequate and shock-responsive national social protection systems in partner countries. The EU and its member states, as the parties of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, are committed to respecting, protecting and fulfilling the rights of persons with disabilities across all policies, ensuring their full, effective and meaningful participation and inclusion in all aspects of life. Strengthening participation of all, with special focus on underrepresented groups, enhancing empowerment through education and training, and up and reskilling and facilitating inclusion of persons with disabilities, women and young persons, as well as older persons, in the labour market is crucial for promoting social cohesion and intergenerational fairness. Social protection is particularly important for children, given their greater vulnerability compared to adults, in order to foster equal opportunities since childhood. The EU and its member states are committed to reducing the number of persons at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the EU, but by at least 15 million people by 2030, out of which at least 5 million should be children. The European Child Guarantee aims to prevent and combat social inclusion. It assures access to a set of key services for children in need, and thus also contributes to upholding the rights of the child. The Youth Action Plan in the EU, External Action 2022-27, a joint communication by the Commission and the High Representative, is a first ever policy framework for a strategic partnership with young persons around the world. It provides the necessary tools to empower young persons to engage in decision-making and policy-making in a meaningful and inclusive way. Ensuring its full participation of older persons in economic, social and political life, while protecting them from the age-related discrimination, is equally important to foster fairness and solidarity between generations. The EU and its member states are dedicated to promoting implementation of commitments under the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging and strengthen the framework for the protection of the rights of the elder persons. We look forward to advancing our work regarding the human rights of older persons, not least by examining ways to implement the recommendations of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, and subsequently by the UN UNGA on gaps in the existing international framework. Promoting equal rights, equal treatment, and equal opportunities for all, including equal pay for work of equal value, is one of the EU's founding principles. 2025 will mark the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration on Platform for Action, which outlines commitments made on the national, regional, and global levels to achieve gender equality. The EU and its member states promote women's and girls' full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and the life free from discrimination and violence. The empowerment of women and girls and the participation in decision-making processes is a priority across all areas of action. The EU and its member states work to further strengthen protection against discrimination at the workplace, including discrimination on the grounds of sex, race, ethnic and social origin, religion or belief, political and any other opinion, disability, age, sexual orientation and gender identity. Chair, we look forward to rich discussions of the 63rd session of the Commission on Social Development, and I thank you.
I thank je remercie le représentant de...
Thank the delegate from Poland, and now give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Camilla Waterson-Grönvall, Minister of Social Affairs of Sweden, who will be speaking on behalf of the LGBT Friends Group.
Chairperson, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the LGBTI core group, an informal cross-regional group established in 2008. Our overarching goal is to work within the United Nations framework to ensure universal respect for the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all individuals without distinction, regardless of their real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons. Our particular focus is on protecting LGBTI persons from violence and discrimination. Chairperson, the group has consistently advocated, including in the last 4 sessions of the Commission, for recognizing and eliminating the discrimination and all forms of violence faced by LGBTI persons and the vulnerable situations they may be placed in. Without access to basic social services such as education, health, and social protection, their situation becomes even more precarious just because of who they are and who they love. This is particularly evident for LGBTI persons who suffer multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, for example, on the grounds of race, religion, ethnicity, disability, or other factors. We are committed to breaking the silence surrounding the suffering faced by LGBTI persons and to drawing attention to the harsh realities they often face because of systematic and discriminatory barriers and societal biases that create and perpetuate deep inequalities and exclusion. These challenges can lead to severe mental health consequences, including chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and feelings of isolation, all of which undermine their overall well-being and ability to thrive in society. This year's priority theme, strengthening solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion, is of particular importance to the LGBTI community. Inclusive societies enable all persons to enjoy protection from violence and discrimination. Too often, deeply rooted discrimination prevents LGBTI persons from having equal access to the labor market, to social protection systems, to health care, or to adequate mental health support, undermining their possibilities to achieve the fulfillment of all the internationally recognized human rights, including the right to an adequate standard of living. In order to be able to foster social cohesion and unlock the full potential of our societies, these barriers need to be removed. We welcome the Secretary General's explicit mention in his report this year to the discrimination LGBTI persons face as a particular threat to social cohesion. Recognizing their marginalization as a barrier to socio-economic inclusion is a first step towards implementing measures that will fully address those challenges. Another important step is the collection of timely and disaggregated data with necessary safeguards in place. As mentioned in the Secretary General's report, a system that is fit for the present and the future must be just, democratic, equitable, representative, inclusive, and financially stable. Such a system must give due consideration to all persons, including LGBTI persons, and ensure that civil society space is open and inclusive. As we move towards the Second World Summit on Social Development, we must ensure that all voices are heard and that we set ourselves up for a multilateral system in which discrimination on any basis has no place. Chairperson, to conclude, we would also like to take this opportunity to reiterate that we are not making radical demands. discrimination and violence against any person should never be tolerated, and that every individual has rights that should be protected. Meaningful inclusion has a broad positive impact across all of society. We call for a strengthened commitment to the universality and interdependence of all human rights and the pledge to leave no one behind, including to fully protect the rights of all LGBTI persons. Thank you.
Je remercie. Je remercie Son Excellence Madame la Ministre.
I thank Her Excellency Minister of Sweden for her statement. We have just heard the last intervention for this morning. I will briefly pause the discussion, the meeting, so that we can rearrange the podium for the remainder of the session. Please remain seated.
Okay, colleagues, we are a bit behind the time, so let us start. So now I invite the Commission to continue its consideration of the agenda item 3A on the priority theme in order to hold a high-level panel discussion on the follow-up of the World Summit for the Social Development in the view of the World Social Summit under the title The Second World Summit for Social Development. And now I invite His Excellency Mr. Danilo Türk, the President of the Club de Madrid, to deliver the keynote statement. Mr. Türk will be the moderator of the panel, but first the keynote speak. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I should start by introducing myself. My name is Danilo Türk. I am former President of the Republic of Slovenia, a member state of the United Nations. I was very personally involved in the preparations for the first social summit that took place in Copenhagen in 1995. That tells you a little bit about my age. I was sitting in this very room, room number 4, conference room number 4, as we were negotiating the outcome document of the Copenhagen summit. So you can imagine that it is with a certain high level of emotion that I'm coming back. And this high level of emotion is further strengthened by the fact that Club de Madrid, the organization of more than 120 former presidents and prime ministers, all of us were democratically elected and left our offices in democratic fashion. We all have supported the idea of the Second World Social Summit. We have actually been among the first who proposed the convening of the Second Summit for Social Development, and we have done so with the full awareness of the complexity of the current international situation, the complexity facing development, and the complexity facing the diplomatic processes today. Earlier today, we heard during the opening part of the current session of the Commission on Social Development about the priorities which pose themselves with a sort of, I would say, historical inevitability. And they are more and more clearly defined, more and more clearly expressed. However, the international situation doesn't seem to be very propitious at this moment, and therefore very hard work is needed. And speaking about diplomacy, I can say that there is no better place for hard diplomatic work than conference room number 4 in the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. So we are starting a process, and our panelists will say more as we proceed with our panel, which is likely to be difficult and which is likely to demand a high level of political commitment and diplomatic skills. There has been certain progress since Copenhagen, since 1995. Almost 700 million people around the world, however, live in extreme poverty. So despite the progress, the level of extreme poverty remained very high. Subsistence levels are $2.15 a day. The things that define extreme poverty have to be looked at with not only seriousness, but with a commitment for change. Extreme poverty was halved between 2010 and 2019, from 14.3% to 7.1%. But the COVID then increased the levels of poverty again. Projections indicate that the global goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030 will not be achieved. Now this, of course, is a very major problem that requires a major mobilization of political and diplomatic energy. And it is for us, people sitting in this room, to help generating that energy. Inequalities continue and have in some cases deepened. Economic growth lifted millions of poverty, but this has not always been translated into shared prosperity or sustainable livelihoods. Additionally, over half of the world's population, 4.1 billion, lack access to form of social protection, and millions of elderly, women, marginalized communities, and young people remain excluded from decision-making. Then the digital transformation, climate change, and geopolitical instability have introduced complexities that demand a more adaptive and inclusive social development work. Now, these are some of the characteristics we have to address with not only perseverance, adaptability, innovation, but, as I said before, with a great mobilization of energy for change. Now, at this point, I would like to make one specific reference. A friend of mine, who is currently also an honorary member of Club de Madrid, Juan Somavia, who was ambassador of Chile to the United Nations in 1990 and later Director General of the International Labour Organization, asked me to convey his apologies because he, for health reasons, cannot be with us today. We are friends. We have made our friendship in the process of preparation of the first World Summit on Social Development. And we have discussed the question of the future many times since then, at the time when he was Director General of the International Labour Organization and later. And we agree that there is a fundamental need that has to be put very much in the focus of the United Nations today, and that is the United Nations Social Development Mandate. And I'm saying this because in the current political climate around the world, social development and social issues are often neglected or seen as not being among the main priorities. And that's a big problem. And that's a problem that affects United Nations as an organization, as in a community of nations. So therefore, the second summit on social development should, first of all, and most importantly, reaffirm the existence of the United Nations Social Development Mandate. And in the opening of the Commission on Social Development, we have heard this morning very eloquently expressed the obvious priorities of the United Nations Social Development Mandate. Secondly, so this is point number one. Secondly, it is important to recognize that social challenges are increasingly multidimensional and that they require integrated, synergetic approaches to policy making. We must ensure that UN agencies work cohesively, not diluting their autonomy or expertise. Now, those of us who have experience with government work, we know how difficult it is to make sure that social priorities are taken as important priorities for various departments and how to address the multidimensional nature of social policy. So that's an important priority to look at and to define policy approaches in the second summit on social development. Third, developing practical methodology, systematically assess both policy proposals and obstacles to their implementation, ensuring that ambitious goals are not set without clear mechanisms for action. Mechanisms for action. Is there a need for innovation in that regard? Now, UN is an institution which is known for its procedural and institutional innovation. That has sometimes been exaggerated, and sometimes innovation goes beyond what is really the priority. But let us think about what kind of innovative approaches are needed to methodological problems that have to be addressed and to institutional setting that needs to be strengthened. And then, of course, fourth, creation of a dedicated institutional space for UN agencies with strong social mandates who have to collaborate strategically, enhancing ECOSOC role, enhancing the work of the Commission for Social Development, for integrated solutions and ensuring that social questions remain at the heart of global policy making and at bringing UN closer to the people. Now, the 1995 first Copenhagen Summit was known as the People's Summit. That is how it was termed, and that is how it was presented in 1995. In an era which still had some characteristics of what was at that time called post-Cold War honeymoon. Now, that post-Cold honeymoon is long over, and now we live in a complex world. But the summit on social development must be a people's summit, and social question is something which is critical, which is essential for ensuring that people live in dignity and that their existence is worthy of human endeavor. Now, the 63rd session of the Commission of Social Development, the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, Beijing +30 on women, COP30, and the 2nd World Summit for Social Development, all these meetings which are expected this year, all they represent a unique opportunity. They must be seen as being part of the same process. They are very much related to what I called earlier a people's summit or a commitment to the people. Let us not forget that as we proceed with preparations to all these important meetings. And of course, I do understand that many of you will be participating not only in the preparations of the World Summit for Social Development, but also in other conferences and other important meetings that I mentioned today. So, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to say these few words at the opening of our work, and I hope that this panel will make a contribution. You started this current session of the Commission on Social Development vigorously and with good definition of priorities. Now let us deepen that and let us see how far we can move the process further. Thank you very much.
I thank the president of the Club de Madrid. Actually, it's like a living history sitting at the podium today with us. So now I welcome our distinguished panelists, which are already here with us today. First of all, Her Excellency Valérie Berset-Bircher, Deputy Head of the Swiss Labor Directorate and Ambassador for International Labor Affairs at the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs of Switzerland. Then we got Mario Nava, Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission. Ms. Anouche Carvar, the French government representative to the International Labour Organization and to the G7, G20 for Labour, Employment and Social Protection. Ms. Eleni Nicolaidou, Expert Minister, Councillor and Deputy Director General of Hellenic Aid and the Ministry of, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Greece. And Mr. Fabio Veras, Senior Researcher of the Institute for Applied Economic Research and Head of the International Policy Center for Inclusive Development. So now I turn the meeting over to the moderator, Sergesin Dalina Turk. I'm excited to hear your panel. We got like exactly an hour to conclude it, so it's a good timing. Excellency, you got the floor and I'm listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now I take my other hat, my other role, which is the moderator of the panel, and I'm not going to speak very much. I have had the opportunity to make an introductory keynote statement, so nothing of substance I need to add at this time, except to explain that we are thinking about how to move beyond the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action on all these important priorities: poverty eradication, full and productive employment and decent work, and social integration. Now, we have distinguished panelists among ourselves, and I will give the floor to them in the order in which they are listed. Each of the panelists have 5 minutes to explain their views, which of course is not much time, but I hope that we'll learn a great deal from all of them. First, I give the floor to Madam Valérie Berset-Bircher, Ambassador, Deputy Head of the Swiss Labor Directorate and Head of the International Labor Affairs State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. Madam Bircher, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying what a great honor it is for Switzerland to participate to this high-level discussion with such a distinguished panel. It's also a pleasure, and thank you to Mr. Turk for your inspiring keynote and laying out the floor for today's discussion. It's a timely opportunity to have this discussion as part of this year's session of the CSocD. As you all know, its primary competence of the body is to give effect to the Copenhagen Declaration. However, we also have to recognize that in today's increasingly complex world, and in order to achieve a holistic and cross-cutting implementation, there are other actors in the UN system that have an important role to play. This is why I would like to particularly focus on the International Labour Organization and its tripartite constituents that have prepared a tripartite contribution for the political declaration of the Second World Summit for Social Development, and I'm sure my French colleague will go more in details on this result that we have been achieved. 30 years have passed since member states came together at Copenhagen, put their differences aside, and led out, and how do we advance now as a society. Despite all the challenges we currently face as an international community, we remain hopeful, and we have no choice but to come together again on the road to Doha in November. As it was mentioned by Mr. Turk, we have made advances since Copenhagen. Extreme poverty has declined, life expectancy has increased, more children are in school, and also the world has witnessed economic growth. But however, in the last decades, we have also seen the rise of some new challenges which we have to take seriously. To name only 3 of them, it was just mentioned, we are still far from meeting the goal to end extreme poverty by 2030. In addition, the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has made also very clear that we are also still far of having comprehensive, sustainable, and universal social protection. At the same time, the digital and green transition are changing jobs markets, and as we know, they are in speed, and it's also very difficult for the people to follow this speed, not only on the labor market, but also to adapt their skills for that. For Switzerland, we have to take action and urgent action, and we would like to base this action on social justice. Social justice means ensuring that every person, regardless of background or geography, has access to the same opportunities and protections. To put it less in abstract terms, we need to have policies, measures, and action that ensure that we are truly leaving no one behind. And it is, of course, essential to take that seriously. We need to regain momentum towards the implementation of the 3 core objectives of the Copenhagen Declaration, and they were recalled also just before. The situation of GDP has grown in the last years. Wealth inequality has widened, leaving many behind and not able to benefit from this economic growth. Women, young people, informal workers often lack access to stable jobs, fair wages, and social protection. So for Switzerland, the top priority will be to reconcile the economy, productive employment, and social impact, and also working conditions to show that both go hand in hand, and we need also in the next years to double productivity. This will be the main goal of Switzerland in the coming months and for the preparation of the summit. This includes policies that strengthen labor institutions, individual capacity to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the changing world of today, and particularly focusing on groups in vulnerable situations. So social justice is not an abstract ideal. A world built on fairness, dignity, and opportunity for all is not just possible, it's a must and it's necessary. This will be the strong priority for my country for the World Social Summit. And we also strongly encourage other member states to make this as a priority as well. We would like also to conclude and say that we are ready to constructively collaborate with all of us, all of you. And also one last message from Switzerland is that we hope that all our delegation will be able to integrate social partners, youth, civil society in our official delegation to Doha. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thank the speaker, Madam Valérie Berset-Bircher, for her statement, and now give the floor to Mr. Mario Nava, Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission.
Dear Chair, dear President Tusk, thank you very much, all fellow panelists. Thank you for your inspiring words. I was not there in 95. Copenhagen was for me the very beginning of my career, and I do remember the conclusions. I was not active part at all of what happened, but I do remember very well the conclusion. I was at that time well below 30, and I saw it as a great hope that we have in front. I will want to do with you 3 things today. One, to take stock of where we stand 30 years later. 2, tell you what we do in the EU, and 3, of course, look forward to the World Social Summit. On taking stock, as it has been said, obviously progress has happened. Many things have advanced, and my Swiss colleague just reflected some, but it's also clear that in the last few years, after the pandemic, with some more wars, the implementation of some commitments has fallen behind. The global extreme poverty rate has increased in 2020 for the very first time since a long time. And today, we have heard it in the previous section, we still have 700 million people who are in extreme poverty. And by most forecasts, we will probably have 500 million people in 2030. We have significant social protection coverage gaps that exist, 1.4 billion children still uncovered in 2023 and in informal unemployment. Workers' wages did not keep pace with productivity, and compliance with labor rights has deteriorated in several countries. What we are doing in the EU? In the EU, we have the European Pillar of Social Rights, which is at the center of our action. We have 3 headline targets that have been declared at the Porto Summit 4 years ago. The 3 headline targets deal with the employment rates. 78% of the Europeans should be in work. They deal with skills and with poverty. On employment rate, we are doing well. On skills, we are doing okay, in the sense we have a target of 60% of all workers to be trained every year, which means that basically everybody will be trained every couple of years. This is nearly happening, but not fully happening. We are involving also the private sector. We have been recently signed the Pact for Skills, a fully private initiative committed to training more than 25 million people by 2030. And via public money, public EU money, we have trained more than 35 million people now. On poverty eradication, we will propose next year in Q1 2026 the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy addressing the root causes of poverty, and we will strengthen European Child Guarantee, which is also supported by the European Social Fund. At the same time, we look at a quality job roadmap, and because of the importance of social dialogue, which I think was also recalled by the previous speakers, we are looking at a new pact for European social dialogue. I'm happy to say that the new pact has been agreed and will be signed at the very beginning of March. Now, we look forward, of course, to the World Social Summit. And in particular, I think in the World Social Summit, 3 things will be very important for us. A precondition is that the views of social partners and civil society are duly taken into account. That was said by my previous speaker, and I'm sure many would agree with them, and I really hope that most delegations will be able to include that. The second point that we look forward for the World Social Summit is that, going along with Secretary General Gutierrez, what he called in 2021, time to renew the social contract, for us is really crucial to rebuild trust and embrace a comprehensive vision of human rights. This, I think, would be a crucial deliverable that the EU and its member states would welcome very much at the Social Summit in November. And third, last but certainly not least, is that international labor standards remain the basis for working towards social development that is just, fair, and equitable. The guarantee of fundamental principles and rights of work as defined by the International Labour Organization, to which we attach a very particular significance. Allow me to emphasize the links between economic growth on the one hand and poverty eradication and equity on the other hand. This will not be an easy task, for sure. That's why we are so many in this room. That's why I have called for full cooperation of social partners and civil society, but it's certainly something that it is at hand. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today as one step forward toward the preparation of this event. Many thanks.
I thank Mr. Nava for his statement, and I now give the floor to Madame Anoucheh Carvar, a French government representative to the International Labour Organization and to the G7 and G20 for labor, employment, and social protection. You have the floor, Madam.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor for me to speak before this commission exactly 9 months before the Doha World Social Summit, 30 years after the first Social Development Summit in Copenhagen. And so this is the perfect time to take stock of the lessons learned from this first summit. The many pledges made at Copenhagen were ambitious. We are pleased, as my colleagues mentioned, that our efforts led to significant results in a number of areas. For example, education, healthcare, and reduction of extreme poverty. However, as was also rightly mentioned, there are many large-scale challenges identified in 1995 that remain unresolved. Persistence of poverty and inequality, especially income inequality within our societies. Secondly, the deeply inadequate coverage of social protection. As we speak, more than half of the world's population does not have access to any social protections. And lastly, the growth of forced labor and child labor at a time when we had pledged to put an end to the worst forms of child labor in 2025, this year, that is to say. So we are quite far from attaining our goals. Informal work also remains unresolved. It is persisting from generation to generation, and this is depriving populations, especially those in intermediate vulnerability, of social protections. The more affluent informal workers can pay for private insurance, but the most underprivileged must resort to using social safety nets. And the middle class or lower middle class enjoy neither. Therefore, they are in extreme vulnerability. After 30 years, we can see a sort of fatigue. This is a key issue for the World Social Summit of 2025. That is to collectively breathe new life into a new, renewed social agenda with common goals, especially because new issues have emerged. These include demographic, digital, and environmental transitions. These bring opportunity, certainly, but they also may deepen inequalities. Thus, it is time for us to take determined action to bring about social justice for as many people as possible. In this regard, we must come together to redefine the principles that govern international cooperation in order to ensure that social justice is at the heart of multilateralism. This is an imperative, as was mentioned several times by the French president at the ILC in 2019, as well as part of the Paris Pact for People on the Planet. This is a prerequisite for rebuilding trust in governments as well as the multilateral system. This summit is the opportunity for us to set a tangible, concrete agenda to end persistent informality of work, to improve labor conditions in global supply chains, to ensure gender equality, to guarantee high-quality social protections for all workers, regardless of their employment status. In other words, the goal is to lay out the terms of a new social contract while keeping in mind the diversity of national situations throughout the world. The November 2025 summit must not limit itself to stock-taking or to goal-setting. It must also call upon us to come to an agreement on the means of achieving those goals. So I'd like to underscore 3 points. First of all, it's important to expand discussions on the preparation of the summit to include all stakeholders, because this is a summit that is focusing on social issues. Therefore, it's key for social partners to contribute to our work and negotiations. Secondly, with regard to work, employment, social protections, we must fully implement the standards and norms set by the ILO for more than 100 years. international labor standards set by the ILO contribute to protecting the rights of workers, as well as the sustainability of economic activity and sustainable and inclusive development. They meet the need for regulation in the labor market as long as they are fully implemented by the states that ratify them. They constitute a common foundation guaranteeing fair, free, unrigged competition between the states that ratify them and enterprises on the global level. This prevents social dumping from becoming a competitive advantage that undermines human rights and social justice. Lastly, there's a need for multilateralism strengthened by greater coherence between the actions of the economic funds and programs of international financial institutions and the goal of reducing inequality pursued by UN bodies working on social and environmental development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the next panelist, Madam Eleni Nicolaidou, expert Minister, Counselor, and Deputy Director General of Hellenic Aid of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Greece. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished panelists, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to address this high-level discussion. It is nearly 30 years after the adoption of the Copenhagen Programme of Action. Critical challenges remain unresolved, while new and emerging threats, such as geopolitical and geoeconomic tensions and conflicts, escalating humanitarian crises, misinformation, and climate change further erode the social fabric. Rapid advancement of artificial intelligence creates opportunities, but also challenges. The Second World Summit for Social Development is an opportunity to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Programme of Action of the First World Summit. I will focus my intervention on accelerating global action for poverty eradication, reducing inequalities, and promoting decent work. Despite progress made in recent decades in terms of eradicating poverty and reducing multidimensional inequalities, the global scenario compels us to review strategies, reaffirm commitments, and mobilize resources. It is estimated that 700 million people remain in extreme poverty, mainly concentrated in low-income countries. In addition, over 50% of global population is not covered by social protection schemes. Tackling poverty and inequality and promoting social justice require objectives and priorities to be oriented towards advancing social progress. Yet, social considerations are not sufficiently integrated into employment, economic, and environmental frameworks and policies. The summit can lay the foundations for building on the outcomes of the Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development. Without financing commitments, our ambitions cannot be materialized. For the Second World Summit for Social Development to truly make a difference, it must mobilize political will for action in key areas. First, the summit must advocate for sustained long-term investment in social protection and employment programs. Second, strengthen social protection systems by increasing coverage and improving coordination across systems to ensure that nobody is left behind. Third, ensure equitable access to quality education for all, adopt development policies for skills, and invest in the area of digitalization. Fourth, ensure universal access to health care. Fifth, promote policy that support active aging by ensuring the inclusion of older people in the economic and political sphere and cultural life. Sixth, leverage technology and digital transformation. For example, Greece investments in digital transformation of labor markets can enhance access to employment and streamline social security systems. Seventh, strengthen the rights of people with disabilities by implementing comprehensive policies that promote accessibility, social inclusion, and equal opportunities. Eighth, implement inclusive housing policies that ensure affordable and adequate housing for all. Innovative approaches, such as utilizing vacant homes for affordable housing and targeting young adults with guaranteed minimum income, should also be considered as part of the demographic and social strategies. Ninth, the role of ILO needs to be underlined in terms of promoting social justice and decent work for all. Multilateralism, and in particular, an effective and efficient UN system, should be central to the summit. 2025 must be the year of the implementation of the Pact of the Future, a key opportunity to strengthen multilateralism. The important role played by the Commission for Social Development in the follow-up and implementation of the Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action must be acknowledged. Distinguished delegates, we need a clear roadmap for action beyond 2025. The summit should not only review past commitments, but set out specific, time-bound goals for implementation with monitoring mechanisms to track progress and accountability. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, and also in particular, thank you to remain strictly within the time limits of 5 minutes. Very impressive. Now I give the floor to Mr. Fabio Veras, Senior Researcher, Institute for Applied Economic Research and Head of the International Policy Center for Inclusive Development. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, distinguished panelists, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as we take stock of the progress regarding the 10 commitments of the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development, it's important to acknowledge that the spirit and commitments of the declaration are intrinsically linked to the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. The Copenhagen Declaration established fundamental principles for promoting social development, including eradicating poverty, promoting full and productive employment, fostering social integration and cohesion, and I would like to add here, strengthening international cooperation as a means of implementation. These principles are at the core of SDGs 1, 2, 8, 10, and 17. We must face the reality that my fellow panelists have highlighted, that we had some initial progress, but successive crises have derailed them in most indicators that we use to monitor SDGs. The goals of eradicating poverty and hunger by 2030 remain distant. Current trends suggest that hundreds of millions of people will continue to live in extreme poverty, while food insecurity and malnutrition persist at unacceptable levels. The Copenhagen Declaration recognized the need to address the structural causes of poverty and hunger, yet these causes largely remain unresolved. Inequality is not merely a moral issue, but also an economic and social obstacle to progress. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few hinders social mobility. Climate change, armed conflicts, and economic crisis act as strains that amplify existing vulnerabilities, undermining progress and hindering the achievements of the SDGs. The Copenhagen Declaration recognized the importance of peace and stability for social development, but the persistence of conflicts in many regions of the world continues to be a major challenge. Despite some progress, slightly more than 50% of the global population has access to at least one social protection program, something that has been already highlighted by the panel. The lack of adequate social coverage, particularly in low-income countries, where it is still below 10%, further compromise progress in other SDGs. Billions of people remain unprotected against life-inherited risks, perpetuating cycles of poverty and vulnerability. To reverse this scenario and give new impetus to the 2030 Agenda and the principles of the Copenhagen Declaration, countries and the international community shall focus on 1. mobilizing domestic resources. States must prioritize and improve the mobilization of internal resources for progressive taxation to finance essential social policies and programs. 2, reforming the global financial architecture. We need a fundamental review of the international financial system to ensure that developing countries have access to affordable and long-term financing. This includes a discussion on debt relief, strategic relocation of special drawing rights, and robust measures to combat illicit financial flows. 3, promote universal social protection. Expanding universal social protection is necessary for reducing poverty, eradicating hunger, and reducing inequality. This requires substantial investment in income transfer programs that protect families in vulnerable situations and individuals over their life cycle. Evidence shows that social protection programs has positive impacts on food security and nutrition, on health and education outcomes, as well as contributing to local economies and shielding families and communities against shocks, including climate-related ones. 4, implementing integrated approaches. We must adopt integrated strategies that address the root causes of poverty and hunger, fostering inclusive growth, decent employment, and resilience to shocks. 5, strengthen international cooperation. The 2030 Agenda depends on robust international cooperation. Developed countries must fulfill their aid commitments and support developing countries' efforts to achieve the SDGs. In addition, South-South and trilateral cooperation shall also play an important role in promoting best practices and learning among countries. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, launched at the summit of the G20 last year during Brazil's presidency, can serve as a catalyst for change we need. The Alliance will work as a platform to galvanize political will and ensure the unwavering commitment of governments to fight hunger and poverty. It will facilitate collaboration among countries, international organizations, the philanthropy sector, knowledge centers, and civil society to support nationally owned and implemented policies that are proven to be effective in addressing poverty and hunger, while facilitating just transitions. The Alliance will drive the mobilization of resources that are currently dispersed and hard to access, as well as new funding to finance social development programs and policies, including social protection. It will promote the sharing of knowledge and best practices on reducing poverty and hunger in the spirit of leaving no one behind. The Global Alliance will prioritize support to low and lower middle-income countries. The challenges are immense, but not insurmountable. The Second World Summit for Social Development shall gather political will, financial resources, and international cooperation to help put SDG back on track and create a fairer, more equitable, and sustainable world for all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, we have heard the panelists who have covered, I would say, the ground of our discussion very comprehensively. In the 5 panelists' statements, we have heard references to all major aspects of social development covered by the Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action. I would like to recall that Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action actually focus on 3 major areas, and that is poverty reduction, the problem of poverty, questions of decent work and employment as a central path towards overcoming poverty, and then social cohesion and the relevant and necessary international cooperation to strengthen that social cohesion. And I believe that our panel has covered many contemporary issues that characterize the problem of implementing or pursuing these very ambitious goals which were established by the Copenhagen First Summit on Social Development. Now, of course, we find ourselves at a time when pursuit of these important objectives, these tasks that were defined and adopted by consensus by all member states of the United Nations is particularly difficult. And it is up to us, members of the United Nations, and the representatives of member states to figure out the way forward. References were made also to the tricky concept of roadmap. Now, in my own experience, references to roadmap sometimes denote strong commitment to bring very clear definition of steps that are needed in order to produce a real roadmap. But sometimes the roadmap is also something to divert attention from things that need to be done, not thinking about the roadmap as such, but really thinking about steps that constitute that roadmap. So, I mean, we have had really a very good platform for discussion. We now have about 30 minutes because we have to finish at 1 p.m. I understand that nowadays UN is very strict about such things. 30 minutes, and I would like to start with questions. So those of you, those distinguished delegates who wish to ask questions should raise their hands. I believe we have one speaker on our list, and in the meantime, maybe the others can figure out what. I think the first speaker is His Excellency Adil Çalışkan, Deputy Minister of Family and Social Support of Turkey, and then we have the delegates of Chile and Cuba. Questions and, of course, comments if you have a strong urge to make comments, really. But please be concise, because we have very little time. The representative of Turkey, Mr. Adil Çalışkan.
Dear delegates, thank you to speak for this panel. Our focus is on new vision as we move toward the second World Summit for Social Development. The Copenhagen Summit set the foundation for a global commitment to social development. It focused on poverty eradication, social integration, and social employment. As we approach Doha Summit, we must reaffirm these commitments. These include economic shift, demographic change, migration, digitalization, and climate crisis. All these challenges require inclusive, people-centered solutions. We strongly believe that social development should be based on religious, social choice, and solidarity. We must ensure that no one is left behind. Dear participants, Turkey has improved social services and protection system. It helps at-risk groups like children, older people, people with disabilities, displaced persons, and those in poverty. In today's digital world, Turkey has led many successful projects. One of the best examples of these integrated social assistance information system. By using digital tools such as the system, we make sure assistance reaches the right people in the best and the fairest way while protecting social justice. We are also running digital literacy programs and women empowerment projects. These help close the digital gap and give more people access to economic and social opportunities. Respected colleagues, we believe that strong families are the foundation of resilient societies. However, many countries today face a worrying demographic change and birth rates drop below the replacement level of 2.1. In response to challenge, Turkey declared 2025 of the family year. Empowering families is not just a national focus, it's a global need. As we prepare for the Doha Summit, we call on the global community focuses social justice and common potential. This summit should not only address currently disparities, but also shape and just more united worlds. We speaking for stronger and fairer societies. I must mention Gaza, where people suffer deeply but show amazing strength, and also Syria, where people had suffered for more than a decade. A fair and lasting solution, important regional stabilities, and future humanity. Thank you.
I thank the speaker, and I invite the next speaker on my list, the delegate of Chile, and I would like to invite him or her or others who wish to speak to address questions to the panel. Well, let us exploit the panelists, their expertise, their experience, their knowledge, because that would help the process of the Commission on Social Development and the preparation of the summit. I give the floor to the delegate of Chile.
Señor Presidente,
Chair, delegations, greetings to all. Since the Copenhagen Summit in 1995, the region has made progress in creating more comprehensive social protection systems. Those already facing challenges ask us to address crises of various kinds, geopolitical, social, health, environmental, and economic, which come in addition to climate crisis, migratory movement, an aging population, and rise in various types of violence. All of these need to be addressed in the current political context. These challenges also come at a time when the fight against poverty and inequality has been a priority in Latin America. Nevertheless, the region continues to face a high concentration of wealth and persistent gaps in access to basic services and employment. According to data from the Inter-American Development Bank, the average income of the richest 10% of the population is 12 times higher than the poorest 10%. In countries such as Colombia, Chile, and Uruguay, 1% of the population controls between 37 and 40% of the country's total wealth, while the poorest half only commands 1/10 of the wealth. Inequality is not just a matter of income. It can also be seen in access to education, health, housing, and social security. In the region, being born into a low-income neighborhood, belonging to an ethnic minority, and having parents with limited schooling or low-paying jobs contributes to inherited inequality. Likewise, geographical location is an important factor determining access to various services. In addition to the above, inequalities have been deepened by the COVID-19 pandemic and exposed the vulnerability of large sectors of the population. We continue to face problems of informal work and low quality of work and gender inequality. Women continue to take on the majority of unpaid care work, impacting their access to formal employment. And this is why we would like to invite all states parties, but also we want to ask what conditions should be upheld in the care systems and by support systems. We know that in order to address these challenges, we need a human-centered development focus, but we must also guarantee universal access to social protection systems and especially to care systems. This must urgently be addressed, especially when we lack pathways to build hope, especially in the current political context. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegate of Cuba.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We are grateful to you for convening this important panel, and we're grateful for the presentations from the panelists. Their concerns are shared by us in general terms. Cuba is firmly committed to the holding of the Second World Social Development Summit in Qatar. The Copenhagen commitments and the 2030 agenda still have to be fulfilled, and so the Qatar summit will be a valuable opportunity to fulfill the commitments undertaken in the Copenhagen Declaration and those of the World Social Summit. And these continue to be very relevant and valid today. The political declaration to be adopted should uphold the Sustainable Development aims, and we are committed to actively and constructively committing and engaging in this process with a view to promoting the welfare of all. Having said this, I would like to ask the panel about their vision as to how the summit and its political declaration can contribute to greater mobilization of resources and to greater attention to development, with a view to inclusive development and the welfare of our peoples, especially in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is well noted, and I'm sure that the panelists, while they will be giving their remarks before ending this panel, each of them will get 2 minutes, I must explain, will be prepared to comment on this particular question. I now give the floor to the delegate of India.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Moderator. I'll keep my question limited. And our own experience has shown that to achieve the objectives of the Copenhagen Summit, in addition to empowerment-based interventions, it's vital to have technology-based interventions. It is vital that technology-based interventions take a lead role for reducing multidimensional poverty and for also ensuring decent work and employment. Our own role has been, our experience has been that when we have used technology interventions, especially digital public infrastructure and new and emerging technologies, we were able to leapfrog developmental processes that in the normal course would have taken decades. This is an area where we need access to these technologies, especially for countries of the global south. So I think a discussion in the panel could bring about what is it that we have been able to do to make such technologies and new and emerging technologies accessible to countries of the global south to achieve the goals of the Copenhagen Summit. And India stands ready, of course, to contribute our own experiences in this regard to our friends and partners. But our forthcoming summit in Doha must have a significant focus on how to leverage technology-based interventions to supplement the empowerment-based interventions that have been the traditional focus in previous years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very pertinent question. As I said before, I would invite all members of the panel to quote, to react to the questions that were raised. And I'll give the floor to the next speaker on my list, to the representative of the Baha'i International Community. Is the speaker in the room? Baha'i International. Yes, very good. You have the floor, young lady.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished speakers. Thank you for your interventions. It is a pleasure to join you here today. My name is Cecilia Schurmeister, and I serve as a representative to the United Nations for the Baha'i International Community. The circumstances of today's world look quite different than in 1995. As has been mentioned, challenges are more interrelated, diverse, and complex. At the same time, humanity is becoming aware of its increasing interdependence. Because of these changes, the international community is forced to widen its conception of what genuine progress and development is, and to ask whether our current indicators adequately measure that progress and encourage conditions that foster collective well-being. Now, only months before the Second World Summit for Social Development, we have an opportunity to renew the foundational motivations of why we do what we do. So my question is, how might our understanding of what development looks like and involves need to be different today as compared to 30 years ago? For example, how has our understanding of what a strong and prosperous nation looks like shifted? And finally, how do these evolving conceptions of prosperity necessitate a change in our approach to development today? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is a very demanding and very wise question. As a person who does remember how development looked 30 years ago, I can confirm, yes, it looks different today. But at the same time, some of the essentials remain the same, and the previous two questions have actually referred to aspects which are really critical today, but not yet fully discussed. And maybe our panel is one of the opportunities to start an in-depth discussion. So our panelists will react to that and to the fundamental question of the difference of the perception and concept of development now as compared to the time of the first social summit. Now I give the floor to the delegate of Qatar.
Shukran.
Thank you.
Rais.
Thank you very much, Chair.
الصوت واضح؟
Chair, are you able to hear me? Excellent. We are very pleased to participate in this important discussion, and we thank all of the speakers for sharing their remarks and points of view. The State of Qatar is very pleased to host the World Social Development Summit in 2025. This summit, the second World Social Summit, including the participation of governments and heads of state. And we will take this opportunity to state that preparations are currently underway, and we are making good progress with the planning. We're working with the Department for Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations, and as part of the preparations for the World Summit, there is a planning visit for the UN team. That took place in January this year. Qatar, together with DESA, is currently hosting an event called The Road to Doha. At this event, we are highlighting the progress that has been made since the first summit in Copenhagen. This event also highlights the lessons learned since the first World Social Summit in Copenhagen. We are very cognizant of the challenges the world is facing, as well as conflicts in many parts of the world, the climate crisis, disparities in income, poverty, and many other challenges. Despite the scale of these challenges, the World Social Development Summit in Doha will be an opportunity for the international community to meet. And through the participation of experts and heads of state and government from all over the world, we will be considering many major thematic issues, including the eradication of poverty, the empowerment of vulnerable populations, and other issues. The political declaration from this summit will be an ambitious and important document for establishing social policies that leave no one behind and that lay the foundations for more just societies. In conclusion, we should commit to strengthening our social policies to overcome common challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. We all look forward to a successful and ambitious outcome of the second World Social Summit in Doha, in Qatar. I give the floor to the last speaker on my list, the representative of Unanima International, after which I will invite the panel members who may wish to briefly react to questions that were raised in the discussion. So now the representative of Unanima International has the floor.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates. My name is Sarah Ben Farha, and I am representing Unanima International, a non-governmental organization with consultative status at the UN since 2005 and a coalition of 25 grassroots communities of women religious. In recent years, Unanima International has focused on the issue of homelessness and what can be done to break the cycles of poverty and exclusion that affect our planet's most marginalized people. At this pivotal moment, the Second World Summit for Social Development presents a unique opportunity to address homelessness as a global priority and as central to driving progress on the Copenhagen Declaration and 2030 Agenda. By explicitly incorporating homelessness into the summit's agenda and political declaration, stakeholders can take decisive action to ensure that no one is left behind in the pursuit of social inclusion, poverty eradication, and decent work for all. As such, Unanima International would like to pose the following questions. Will homelessness explicitly be addressed in the agenda for the Second World Summit on Social Development? What concrete measures will the summit take to ensure that homelessness is meaningfully integrated into the summit's agenda and final outcomes? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We heard the last speaker in our discussion. I will now ask the panelists who would wish to comment on questions that were raised. We have 4 very important questions that were raised in the discussion, and I would like to proceed in the same order of speakers in which we started our panel. Each panelist will have about 2 minutes to give a very concise reaction. It being fully understood that some of these questions, of course, require a long discussion and a lot of work. It's not something that you can simply provide a recipe in a minute or 2. So that's understood. But in addition to that, we have to be mindful of the time limits. So 2 minutes for each panelist, and I first give the floor to Madame Valérie Berset-Bircher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turk, and thank you for your question. And I'll try to give some elements of answers to not all questions, but some of them. The first question related to greater mobilization of resources. I would like to put it in relation to one of the big priority we see for this second summit is how are we able to reconcile economic development, economic opportunities, and social development. And we believe that we are in a crucial year or time where we really need to make that happen and to prove that both goes hand in hand. And so that could be an answer to how we are able to mobilize resources. Second question from our colleague from India. How are we able to leverage technological-based solution? Our second priority, I would say, from the Swiss side is, and I mentioned it, is how do we address equal access to education and upskilling? And I think we could put that together. The rapid rise of emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, of course, they present a lot of new opportunities. They also make increasingly challenging for the population, even the educated population, and for the older population and generation to keep the momentum. And they should help us to, the new technologies should really help us to also bridge this gap. And this is also one very important focus we should have, greater investment in education and also lifelong learning and vocational training. And the last question about homelessness, I think this should be an element that we should all take into the negotiation on the political declaration that we are going to start to negotiate, if we can find a suitable place for that. And if I may, because I think I still have 1 minute, maybe? Less? Okay, so 30 seconds. I think also one very important element is to strengthen trust in government and in our institution and in good governance. That is my last word. Thank you.
Thank you. Very pointed and very powerful. Now, Mr. Mario Neva.
Many thanks. And first of all, I subscribe to exactly the last sentence of my Swiss colleague. I think that's the prerequisite of that. And then to respond, I would like to start from the challenges given to us by the young people, the 2 NGOs, and in particular, what is different with respect to 30 years ago. There are a number of things which are profoundly different. Obviously, for example, the green issue and the climate change that was essentially not absent, but much less important 30 years ago. I think We are making good progress there, but I think we should certainly not stop. Second, the demographic challenge, it was raised by the Turkey intervention, was not a question, but I think it is a big challenge. Just enough to say that 30 years ago, the most numerous cohort was the 25 plus, who could make kids. Today, the most numerous cohort in Europe is the 55 plus, who cannot make kids, and in 20 years, they will be the 75 plus. So I think this is a very important challenge. Third is the point raised by India on the technological non-divide, so the importance of sharing technology, which has both a supply and demand effect on so the digital fracture, avoiding that, but also a very important things in upskilling and reskilling. And I would like to conclude the very warm welcome to the words on homelessness. As I said, the European Union will do the first ever anti-strategy poverty in Q1 2026. Fight against homelessness is certainly a big part of that. We do have some successes in Europe, and we really hope that with the cooperation of all the social partners and all the civil society, we are able to have a very good discussion on that and take measures against what is definitely the most absurd form of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Madam Anousheh Karwar.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will begin by the question from Turkey about the challenge of our aging populations. I think aging populations is affecting the entire planet almost. This is a fundamental question also of how we fund our pension system and healthcare and social protection system. It's also the question of intergenerational solidarity. And I really want to emphasize and say how much I admire the G20 community and Turkey in particular, because Turkey put the employment of young people, the youth, at the heart of the G20 agenda, which includes, amongst other things, increasing employment amongst young people. One of the solutions to the aging population issue is increasing the proportion and the rate of employment amongst young people. On Cuba's question relating to larger contribution and greater assistance for development, I would take again the example of universal social protections, universal coverage. This has been a major part of the work of the ILO and also other UN agencies on this issue. And I think the key with the Global Accelerator, the Secretary General of the United Nations launched 2 years ago on employment and social protections. The key to this is in the smart mix, this a clever blend of mobilizing natural resources and national resources and ensuring financial assistance can be given to poorer nations. So mobilization of national resources and financial assistance, development assistance, international development assistance, these are the major issues for us. We've highlighted how this goes hand in hand with social coverage. And finally, the third question, new forms of prosperity. 30 years after Copenhagen, are we talking now of another type of prosperity? Obviously, the increase in wealth that has been highlighted by my colleagues, we must address the question of the finite resources on the planet, but also respect for human rights and human rights in the labour force. The environmental, the social, and governance, environment, social, and governance, they will go together. Thank you.
Thank you. I give now the floor to Madam Eleni Nicolaidou.
Thank you, Chair. As regards the question of Cuba, I would like to mention that we cannot achieve the objectives of the Copenhagen Programme of Action without allocating resources. That's why in my presentation, I specifically made a point about the upcoming Seville conference. It is a very important conference because during that conference, we need to push for meaningful reforms of the multilateral institutions in a world where debt crisis, climate change, and other transnational challenges require a coordinated action. Therefore, FFD4 is an important opportunity, and it is linked in a way, to a great extent, to the success of the action plan of Copenhagen. Now, as regards the homeless, I believe that special attention should be given to those to this segment of the population, and this is a problem not just for developing countries, but for developed countries as well. So special measures should be provided in addition to tackling poverty. Now, as regards one question about how was the world development in 1995 and now, of course it has changed dramatically. Of course, we have seen a decrease in poverty, and we have seen a lot of countries from the so-called global south that are emerging economies, that they became donors themselves and big donors. So the global environment has changed dramatically since then. Now, as regards technological transfer, I also believe, I agree with previous speakers, that education and investment in skills in digitalization, something I presented in my presentation, is very important, and probably gradually we'll be able to leverage the artificial intelligence towards this direction. But of course, a lot of countries from global south are developing technology, are innovative, and there is a lot of South-South cooperation, which is very important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Mr. Fabio Veras.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the questions, very, very interesting, important questions. I will start on the finance commitment, and perhaps I'm going to complement what has been already said by my fellow panelists. Highlighting two things. One of the biggest discussions, for example, that we have been having in the IBSA G20 process that started with India, then Brazil, now in South Africa, is actually how to allow the multilateral development banks to have more concessional loans to the global south, to countries in development. So that's one work that has been developed, and I think that now we have a very interesting roadmap that we should be looking at. The other aspect that we all know is that climate finance is a potential source of funds for social development, and we should be highlighting that both for the World Summit, but also for the Financing for Development track of discussion, as my fellow panelists already mentioned. But having said that, I think it's also important for our countries in the global south also looking for their own domestic resource mobilization. It's important to point the finger and to tell the developed countries that they should pay what they have committed to do in the multilateral fora, but also we need through South-South cooperation and our internal dialogue to advance this process internally. The other aspect is DPI. DPI is another, it was one of the priorities during the G20. India is something that is very important, particularly when we are talking about social protection and how to deliver service and make payments in a fairer way. India is one of the biggest champions, but I would also highlight some of the innovations that took place in the last 10 years in Africa. I would nominate, for example, Kenya with the MPES and the payments of social benefits. That was something, a clear example of leapfrogging coming from the global south. In terms of the innovations and what's different now is basically climate change and how we should deal with it. I think that my time is off, so I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to conclude our part of work by thanking all the panelists. I think that their insights have actually helped us to move the discussion forward and actually produced a good overview of views or approaches that are necessary with regard to all the questions that were raised. So I do not wish to offer any summary at this stage. I would like to thank the panelists and invite all the participants in the room to give them a big hand and thank them for their contribution. And with this, I now pass the floor back to the chair of the session to close the meeting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Yes, I'm joining you with complimenting our distinguished panelists, but I will ask you to also to give enough equally round of applause for our great moderator, His Excellency Danilo Türk. That concludes our morning session. Before adjourning the meeting, I would like to inform you that the Commission will resume its general discussion this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this very room. The meeting is adjourned.